What happens when cruelty meets unexpected courage in the middle of a quiet park? Watch till the end to see the shocking twist. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the canopy of trees in the city park, painting patches of golden light on the paved paths. It was a day that felt alive with energy. Children ran across the lawns, families gathered near the fountains, joggers passed by in rhythmic strides, and the sound of distant laughter floated through the air. For most visitors, it was an ordinary weekend day, a moment to enjoy peace, warmth, and community. Among the people in the park was a little girl sitting in a wheelchair. Her pink t-shirt caught the sunlight, the bright color contrasting against the blue frame of her chair. She was young, full of spirit despite her fragile situation. Her mother had brought her to the park to give her a change of scenery, to let her feel the freedom of open spaces, to breathe air that wasn't confined by walls. They had planned nothing complicated, just a simple walk together, to share ice cream, to watch the birds, and to feel less alone in a world that sometimes seemed too heavy for her small shoulders. But somewhere between the crowd near the fountain and the winding paths that cut deeper into the park, she lost her mother. It happened so suddenly that it took her a moment to realize it. One instant, her mother's gentle hand rested on the wheelchair handle, guiding her forward through the busy pathway. The next, the hand was gone. She looked around, searching, expecting to see the familiar figure only a step away. Instead, she saw strangers, faces she didn't know, tall adults walking briskly, children darting past in play. Her heart sank. She spun the wheels of her chair, moving slowly, carefully scanning the area. "Mom?" she called out, her voice trembling more than she intended. Nobody answered. The crowd continued with its own business, detached, unaware of the fear now spreading in her chest. The more she looked, the more the panic grew. Every direction seemed to lead her further into confusion. The fountain she remembered was now out of sight. The benches she had noticed earlier no longer looked familiar. The bustling park, once warm and inviting, began to feel like a maze designed to trap her. She called again, louder this time. "Mom, where are you?" A few heads turned but quickly looked away. The people who noticed seemed unsure how to respond, some offering brief sympathetic glances before returning to their own paths. To them, she was just a child calling out for her parent in a crowded place. They didn't realize that her mother was truly missing from her side, that her panic wasn't a game or a momentary worry. Tears stung the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She gripped the wheels of her chair tighter, moving forward with determination. She told herself she would find her mother. She had to. Minutes passed, though each one felt heavier than the last. The voices of the park blurred together, sounds overlapping until everything seemed distant. The little girl's breathing grew quick and uneven. She wasn't just scared of being alone. She was scared of being powerless, trapped in her chair without the comfort of her mother's presence. Then she noticed someone watching her. At first, it was just a shape leaning against a tree near the side of the path. The man wore a black leather jacket studded with spikes that glistened harshly in the sunlight. His posture was slouched, but his eyes, sharp and intrusive, were locked on her. A cruel smile slowly curved across his face as he pushed himself away from the tree and walked toward her. The girl's pulse quickened. She didn't know this man, but something in his expression, something in the way he moved, made her stomach twist. She froze, unsure whether to wheel herself away or wait. The man closed the distance quickly. His boots hit the pavement with heavy steps, each one echoing in her ears. As he came closer, she could see the rough lines of his face, the tangled hair that fell around it, and the sneer that only grew sharper. The leather jacket seemed like armor, each spike reflecting a shard of sunlight. He carried himself not just with arrogance, but with menace, as though he thrived on the fear he inspired. The girl tried to keep her composure. She reminded herself that she was strong, even if she was small, even if she was seated in her chair. But strength doesn't always quiet fear. She swallowed hard and said, her voice trembling, "I'm looking for my mom." The man tilted his head, feigning confusion, before chuckling under his breath. It wasn't the laugh of kindness, not even of amusement. It was sharp, mocking, meant to unsettle. He stepped closer, towering over her now. "You're all alone," he said slowly, his tone coated with something sinister. The girl gripped the armrest of her chair tightly. She wished she could roll herself backward, away from his looming presence, but her hands felt frozen. She wanted to call for help, but the words stuck in her throat. Around them, the life of the park continued. People walked past on the other side of the path, their eyes not turning quickly enough to see the danger unfolding. Her voice finally found strength again, small but defiant. "Leave me alone. I'm waiting for my mom." The man's smirk deepened. He leaned down slightly, his eyes narrowing as though savoring her fear. "Are you sure she's coming back?" he asked with a cruel edge, as if testing how much despair he could push into her heart with only words. The girl's chest tightened, but she didn't answer. She told herself not to show weakness, not to let him see her break. Yet the more she sat under his shadow, the more she realized she was trapped. The sky above still looked bright, the park still sounded alive, but for her the world had shifted. The day was no longer peaceful. It had turned into something darker, something dangerous. And though she couldn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of what was about to unfold. The man in the spiked leather jacket leaned closer, the shadow of his figure stretching over the small girl in her wheelchair. His grin widened, revealing teeth that looked more like a snarl than a smile. Around them, people still moved through the park, but in this small pocket of space, it felt as though the rest of the world had vanished. "You really are alone," he said, his voice low, almost growling. "No one's here to help you. Just you and me." The girl tightened her grip on the armrests of her chair. She felt her throat dry, but her spirit, shaken as it was, refused to bend. She lifted her chin and said firmly, "I told you, I'm waiting for my mom. Leave me alone." The biker chuckled, the sound carrying an edge of cruelty. He circled slightly, his boots scraping against the pavement as he walked around her chair like a predator sizing up its prey. He bent down suddenly, his face close to hers, and sneered. "Look at you," he muttered, "trapped in that chair. Can't even run. Can't even fight back. You're nothing but an easy target." The words pierced her, but she didn't look away. Her heart pounded in her chest, yet she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. "I'm not nothing," she said sharply, surprising even herself with the strength in her tone. "I'm a person. You don't get to treat me this way." For a brief moment, the biker's eyes flickered with something like surprise, but it quickly hardened into rage. His smirk twisted into a snarl. "You dare talk back to me?" he spat, gripping the handles of her wheelchair and shaking it roughly. The sudden jolt made her gasp, her small hands clutching tighter at the chair's sides. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, the secure ground beneath her no longer steady. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out anyway. "Stop it! I said stop!" The biker leaned closer, his breath hot and acrid. "Or what? What are you going to do, huh?" His laugh rang harshly in her ears. "You can't do anything. You're weak. You're pathetic." Tears threatened at the edges of her eyes, but anger boiled alongside fear. She clenched her fists, trembling with both emotions. Her voice rose, raw with desperation and defiance. "I said, stop! I'm not your toy. I'm a human being. Treat me like one." The shout echoed louder than she expected, catching the attention of a few distant passers-by. They glanced over, pausing briefly, but the biker's imposing figure and wild appearance seemed enough to discourage their involvement. People turned away, pretending not to see, and continued walking. The girl's heart sank at the realization. No one was stepping forward to help. The biker's face twisted with fury. He didn't like being yelled at, least of all by a child who defied his mockery. His voice rose, sharp and venomous. "You think you're brave because you can yell? You think someone's coming to save you? No one cares. No one ever will." The girl shook her head, her lips trembling but her voice steady. "You're wrong." That final push of defiance lit a fire in the man's eyes. He grabbed the front of her pink shirt and yanked her slightly forward. The girl let out a cry of pain, her body jerking awkwardly against the limits of the chair. "You need to learn your place," he growled. And then, without hesitation, he slapped her across the face. The crack of the blow was sharp, echoing in the quiet pocket of the park where they stood. Her head snapped to the side, her cheek stinging, her eyes widening from the shock of the strike. Tears rolled down her face now, unbidden and uncontrollable. The humiliation was as painful as the physical blow. The biker pulled back, staring at her with a twisted satisfaction, as though striking a helpless child somehow made him powerful. He laughed again, louder this time, crueler. The girl's body trembled, her hands shaking violently as she held onto her chair. The sting on her cheek was sharp, but her words still came. You're a monster," she whispered, her voice small, yet cutting. The biker crouched down so that his eyes met hers directly. "Monster?" he echoed mockingly. "Maybe. But monsters win. Monsters always win. And you—" He jabbed a finger at her chest, hard enough to make her flinch. "You're nothing." Her tears flowed freely now, streaking down her cheeks, but beneath them, the fire in her gaze refused to die out. She held his stare, her small voice trembling but unbroken. "Someday, someone will stop you." His laugh came again, though it was harsher, angrier this time. "And who's going to stop me? You?" He shook the chair again violently, the metal frame rattling. The girl cried out, clutching desperately at the armrest to keep herself steady. Her scream tore through the air, a plea mixed with pain and rage. Still, no one came. The few who heard turned away, unwilling to involve themselves. The park, filled with people, suddenly felt like the loneliest place in the world. The biker, emboldened by her isolation, leaned back slightly and stretched his arms, savoring the scene. "See? Nobody cares. You scream, and no one listens. This is the real world, little girl." Her lips quivered, and her breath hitched as she fought to hold her ground against his words. The sting on her cheek burned, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her chest. And yet, even as despair threatened to consume her, a faint spark inside her refused to fade. She whispered again, almost to herself, "Someone will come. Someone will stop you." The biker sneered, raising his hand again as though preparing to strike once more. His shadow loomed, his anger boiling, ready to silence her for daring to speak back. But what neither of them knew was that her words were about to come true, sooner than either could imagine. The biker's hand hovered in the air, his face twisted with fury, ready to strike again. The little girl flinched instinctively, bracing for another blow. Her cheek already burned from the first slap, her tears streaming down. But her words still echoed between them. "Someone will stop you." The biker sneered. "Let's see who's going to stop me now." And that was when a voice cut through the air like thunder. "Hey!" The single word was so sharp, so commanding, that it froze the moment in place. The biker jerked his head toward the sound, startled. The girl's watery eyes shifted too, hope flickering through her fear. Two towering figures strode down the path toward them, their steps heavy, their expressions carved in stone. Their presence alone seemed to shift the air as though the park itself held its breath. It was them. Dwayne Johnson and John Cena. They had been walking together after their morning workout, sweat still damp on their shirts, their pace casual, as they talked about training and upcoming projects. But the second they spotted what was happening, a grown man towering over a crying child in a wheelchair, their pace changed. Their jaws tightened, their eyes darkened, and now they marched with purpose, with fury simmering just beneath their controlled steps. The biker's smirk faltered just for an instant. His bravado wavered under the weight of those glares, but he quickly shook it off, forcing a sneer back onto his face. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" he barked, trying to mask the nervous edge creeping into his tone. John Cena stopped a few feet away, his green cap casting a shadow over his serious eyes. His voice boomed, unshaken and full of authority. "We're the guys telling you to back off, right now." The biker laughed harshly, though it sounded more defensive than confident. He glanced between them, recognizing the faces, but unwilling to admit the intimidation crawling under his skin. "What's this? The big heroes? Gonna save the poor little girl?" He leaned closer to the child again, deliberately provoking. "Guess what? She's mine to deal with." That was when Dwayne Johnson stepped forward, closing the gap with a stare so intense it was almost physical. His massive frame blocked the biker's view of the girl entirely, his shadow stretching over both of them. "She's not yours," Dwayne said, his voice deep, low, and sharp as steel. "She's a child, and you're done." The biker scoffed and took a step back, but he wasn't retreating. He was buying time. His hand went to his lips and he let out a sharp whistle. The sound echoed through the trees. Moments later, the growl of engines filled the park. From the edges of the path, from behind trees and benches, the rest of his crew appeared. Motorcycles revved, their chrome frames gleaming under the sun as the gang rolled in. There were at least a dozen of them, some dismounting, others staying astride their bikes, grinning with malice. Chains rattled, boots stomped, leather jackets closed in like a wave of menace. The little girl gasped, her hands clutching tightly at her chair. What had already been terrifying now looked hopeless. The biker puffed up his chest, emboldened by the arrival of his gang. He turned back to Dwayne and Cena, spreading his arms as if in victory. "See that? You two think you can play heroes? You're outnumbered. This is our park, our rules." The other bikers laughed, some cracking their knuckles, others swinging chains idly, eager for violence. The leader grinned wide, his confidence now overflowing. "You really think the two of you can take on all of us?" he taunted. John Cena took a single step forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dwayne. He didn't flinch. His jaw tightened and his fists slowly clenched at his sides. He spoke calmly, but his words cut through the laughter like blades. "Numbers don't matter when you're standing on the wrong side." The air seemed to thicken. The girl looked up at them both, her fear colliding with awe. For the first time since she lost her mother, she didn't feel completely helpless. She whispered softly, almost as if to herself, "They came." Dwayne glanced at her for just a moment, his face softening. Then he looked back at the gang, his expression hardening again, the fire in his eyes blazing. "We'll give you one chance. Leave now, or you're going to regret every second you spend here." The leader laughed so loudly that it spurred the others into jeering. "Leave? No, big man. You're not walking out of here, not with her, not at all." He raised his hand in a signal. The gang shifted, tightening the circle around them, their boots and bikes forming a wall of hostility. The little girl's heart hammered in her chest. The gang looked unstoppable. It was Dwayne and John, just two men against a pack of snarling wolves. The leader sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're about to learn a lesson. Heroes don't win. Monsters do." Dwayne leaned slightly toward Cena, his voice low but calm, meant only for his friend's ears. "You ready?" Cena adjusted his cap, his lips curving into the faintest hint of a grim smile. "Always." The gang roared, chains whipping, fists tightening, engines still rumbling like thunder. The first step of an attack trembled in the air, seconds away from erupting. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the storm. And, in the tense silence that followed, the battle was about to begin. The engines roared louder, the sharp growl of motorcycles blending into a chorus of menace. The gang tightened their circle, boots hitting the pavement, chains dragging across the ground with metallic clangs that made the little girl wince. She sat frozen in her chair, her small hands gripping the wheels as though they were lifelines. Around her, the bright, cheerful park had transformed into something darker, an arena where cruelty stood ready to crush hope. The leader of the bikers stood at the front, his leather jacket bristling with spikes, his chest puffed out as he sneered at the two men before him. "Well, look at this," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the noise of his crew. "Two movie stars, huh? Think your muscles and your fame are going to save you?" The gang laughed, their jeers cutting through the air. One swung a chain lazily in his hand, another cracked his knuckles, while two more leaned against their bikes, grinning like spectators before a fight. The little girl glanced from face to face, every sneer fueling her fear, but her eyes kept drifting back to the two men who hadn't moved an inch. Dwayne Johnson and John Cena stood shoulder to shoulder, unflinching. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't posture the way the bikers did. They simply stood firm, their presence alone radiating strength, calm, and control. Dwayne's deep voice cut through the jeers. "We're giving you one last chance. Step back. Leave this park, or you'll regret what happens next." The leader tilted his head back and laughed, the sound harsh and hollow. "Regret? You're outnumbered, big man. You and your buddy here are about to be ground into the pavement." He lifted his hand, gesturing to his men. "This is our territory. Nobody tells us what to do." The bikers shouted their agreement, their voices overlapping into a wall of noise. The leader smirked, clearly enjoying the show of power. He looked back at the girl, his sneer deepening. "And as for her, she's ours. You can't save her." The words lit a fire in John Cena's eyes. His jaw clenched, his body shifted forward. His voice thundered, carrying over the laughter and the engines. "She's not yours. She's a child, and you will not touch her again." The gang fell quiet for a second. The strength in his voice was undeniable, the command in it unshakable. For that moment, even the bravest of the bikers hesitated, but their leader broke the silence with another laugh, louder this time, determined to drown out doubt. "You think you scare us? You're nothing but 2 men against 12. You can't win." Dwayne's gaze hardened, his muscles tense but controlled, his voice steady as stone. "We don't need to scare you. We just need to stop you." The leader snarled and gave a sharp wave of his hand. His crew moved in closer, the circle tightening until the space between them and the two wrestlers was barely a few feet. The girl sat trapped in the center of it all, her chair trembling slightly as her hands shook against the wheels. She wanted to call out, to beg them to stop, but the words wouldn't come. The air grew heavier, thicker with tension. The bikers jeered, some shouting insults, others promising violence. One spat on the ground, another slammed his fist into his palm. The circle wasn't just a wall, it was a cage. The leader stepped forward again, stopping just a few feet from Dwayne. His voice dropped lower, dripping with venom. "I'll give you a choice. Walk away, and maybe we let you leave in one piece. Stay here, and we tear you apart." Dwayne didn't blink. He leaned slightly toward John, speaking in a voice meant for his friend alone. "This is it." John adjusted his cap with one hand, his lips tightening into a grim line. "Yeah, this is it." The leader smirked, mistaking their quiet preparation for hesitation. He spread his arms wide, turning back to his crew. "They're scared. Look at them. 2 big names and they're shaking in their boots." The bikers howled with laughter, feeding off their leader's words. They stomped, clanged their chains, revved their engines. The noise swelled like a storm, and the little girl pressed her hands to her ears, her tears streaming down again. But when she dared to open her eyes and look at Dwayne and John, she saw no fear. Their eyes were locked on the gang, their bodies ready, their stance unshaken. They weren't scared. They were waiting. The leader snapped his fingers and pointed directly at Dwayne. "Get them!" The circle erupted. Chains whipped forward, fists raised, boots pounded against the ground as the gang surged inward. The girl screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. The first biker lunged, swinging his chain toward John, while 2 others rushed at Dwayne from either side. The standoff was over. The fight had begun. The command had been given. The leader's shout, "Get them!" unleashed the fury of the gang. The circle closed in like a collapsing wall, chains whistling through the air, boots pounding against the pavement. The motorcycles still roared at the edges, engines growling like beasts, filling the park with an atmosphere of raw chaos. The little girl screamed, covering her ears with her small hands, but she couldn't block out the violence exploding around her. The first biker swung a heavy chain at John Cena, the metal links glinting as they cut through the air. John's reflexes snapped into motion. He ducked under the swing, pivoted, and drove his fist upward in a brutal uppercut. The punch connected squarely with the man's jaw. The biker's body lifted from the ground, his head snapping back before he collapsed with a thud, sprawled and unconscious. Almost simultaneously, 2 bikers lunged at Dwayne Johnson from opposite sides. One tried to tackle him low, the other aimed a heavy punch at his head. Dwayne moved with a precision that belied his massive frame. He sidestepped the low tackle, grabbed the other by the wrist mid-swing, and yanked him forward with brutal force. The biker slammed chest first into Dwayne's shoulder like a battering ram. A single follow-up elbow strike from Dwayne sent him crumpling to the ground. The second attacker barely had time to recover before Dwayne seized him by the vest, lifted him effortlessly, and hurled him across the pavement into 2 more of his comrades. The sound of bodies colliding, groans, and curses filled the air. Another chain came flying, this time aimed at John's head. He caught it with both hands, yanked hard, and pulled the wielder off balance. With one powerful jerk, he dragged the biker toward him and slammed a knee into his gut. The man folded over with a choked gasp before John's forearm smashed across his back, sending him sprawling on the ground. The gang didn't hesitate. They came in waves, fueled by rage and numbers. 4 more charged at once, splitting between the 2 men. Dwayne ducked a wild swing, his fists like sledgehammers as he landed blow after blow, each one precise, devastating, efficient. A right hook floored one biker, a spinning back elbow caught another in the temple, dropping him instantly. John blocked a punch with his forearm, countered with a sharp jab, then pivoted to dodge a second attacker rushing in from the side. He grabbed the man's arm, twisted it painfully, and used the momentum to hurl him into another charging thug. Both crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The little girl, though trembling with fear, couldn't tear her eyes away. Through the blur of her tears, she watched the two men fight not just with power, but with control, every move executed with the precision of warriors who had trained their entire lives. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt hope bloom in her chest. But the gang wasn't finished. The leader barked orders, his face twisted in anger. "Don't just stand there. Take them down." The largest of the bikers stepped forward now, a giant of a man with a steel chain wrapped around his forearm. He charged at Dwayne, swinging the chain like a weapon. The links clanged against the pavement as he swung wildly, each strike carrying the weight to shatter bones. Dwayne raised his arm, deflecting one swing, then another, his muscles straining under the impact. The third strike came dangerously close, grazing his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, stepped inside the man's reach and caught the chain mid-swing. With a violent twist, he wrenched it free from the biker's arm, then drove his fist straight into the man's chest. The blow landed with a thunderous crack, sending the giant staggering backward, gasping for breath, before collapsing like a felled tree. On the other side, John faced two bikers at once, both armed with makeshift clubs. One swung high, the other low. John ducked the high strike, blocked the low one with his leg, and retaliated with a devastating double clothesline that sent both men flipping onto their backs. The ground shook with their fall. The gang was faltering, but still they pressed forward. Some cursed, some shouted in frustration, but the fear was growing in their eyes. The balance of the fight had shifted. 12 against 2 no longer looked like an advantage. It looked like a slaughter, and not in their favor. The leader himself finally stepped in, fury boiling over. He drew a knife from his belt, the blade glinting under the sun. He charged straight at the girl, snarling. Her eyes widened, her voice breaking into a terrified scream, "No!" But before the blade could touch her, Dwayne was there. He slammed into the leader with a shoulder charge so powerful it knocked the knife from his hand and sent it skittering across the pavement. The leader stumbled, stunned, before Dwayne grabbed him by the collar and launched him backward into the dirt. "You don't touch her," Dwayne growled, his voice like thunder. The remaining bikers hesitated now, their courage draining as one after another lay groaning on the ground. John stood tall, chest heaving, fists clenched, glaring at the last few who hadn't yet attacked. "You want to keep going?" he demanded. "Or are you done?" For a moment, silence. The girl's ragged breathing was the only sound. Then one of the bikers dropped his chain and stepped back. Another followed. The fight had left them. They weren't ready to face men like these. But the leader, bruised and gasping, pushed himself back to his feet, his pride unwilling to let go. "This isn't over," he spat, his face twisted in hatred. Dwayne loomed over him, eyes blazing. "Yes, it is." He grabbed the man by the vest, spun him around, and slammed him onto the hood of his own bike with such force that the machine rocked under the impact. The leader groaned, finally beaten, his strength gone. The girl's eyes widened as the last biker fell. Around her, the once terrifying circle of leather and spikes was broken, shattered by the sheer will and strength of two men. Engines still rumbled in the distance, but the chaos had ended. One by one, the groaning bodies of the gang littered the ground. Some clutched their ribs, some held their jaws, others lay unmoving. The battle was over, but sirens were already beginning to wail in the distance, faint but growing louder, and the little girl, her heart still pounding, realized the nightmare was ending too. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the fading roar of motorcycle engines. The sound echoed across the park, a promise that this nightmare was about to end. For the first time since she lost her mother, the little girl in the wheelchair allowed herself to take a trembling breath of relief. Around her, the once mighty biker gang lay scattered across the pavement, moaning and broken. Some clutched their ribs, others lay sprawled unconscious, their leather jackets and chains a pitiful sight compared to the proud menace they had shown moments ago. The leader, who had towered over her with cruel laughter, now slumped across the hood of his own bike, barely able to lift his head. Dwayne Johnson stood tall in the center of the chaos, his chest rising and falling heavily, his fists still clenched as though ready for another wave of enemies. John Cena was at his side, his green cap tilted low over his sweat-soaked brow, his eyes sharp and unwavering. Both men looked like titans who had carved victory out of impossible odds, but as the adrenaline faded, their focus turned to what mattered most. Dwayne crouched down to the girl's level, his massive frame softening as his eyes met hers. The tears on her cheeks had dried into faint streaks, but her wide eyes still shimmered with fear. He spoke gently, his voice low, carrying none of the fury that had shaken the bikers moments ago. "You're safe now," he said. "They won't hurt you anymore." The girl's lip trembled as she tried to form words, but only a faint sob came out. She reached out instinctively, her small hand brushing against his. Dwayne squeezed it lightly, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. John approached from the other side, kneeling down so that his gaze met hers as well. "You were brave," he told her, his voice filled with calm certainty. "Don't ever forget that. You stood up to him. That matters." The girl blinked rapidly, her tears welling again, but this time they weren't just from fear. They were from the overwhelming flood of safety, of finally being seen, of finally knowing that someone had come for her. Blue and red lights flashed across the trees as police cars skidded to a stop on the edge of the path. Officers poured out, their radios crackling, their voices sharp with orders. They froze briefly at the sight before them. Nearly a dozen bikers beaten and sprawled across the ground, and two men standing calmly in the middle of it all. "What the hell happened here?" one officer muttered as he took in the scene. Dwayne stood to his full height, his voice steady and unshaken. "They attacked her," he said, gesturing to the girl. "We stopped them." The officers quickly moved in, snapping handcuffs onto the groaning bikers, dragging them upright one by one. Some protested weakly, others begged, but most were too dazed to resist. The leader spat curses until an officer shoved him face first into the dirt, cuffing his hands behind his back. As the chaos of the arrests continued, a new sound rose above it all. A frantic voice calling out desperately, "Maya! Maya, where are you?" The girl's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she recognized the voice. "Mom!" she cried out, her voice breaking with relief. A woman appeared, sprinting down the path, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears. She nearly collapsed when she saw her daughter, rushing forward with arms outstretched. She fell to her knees in front of the wheelchair, gathering the girl into her embrace. "Oh my God, baby!" the mother sobbed, clutching her tightly. "I was so scared. I couldn't find you. Her words broke apart as she kissed her daughter's hair, her tears soaking into the girl's shirt. The girl clung to her mother with equal desperation, her small voice muffled against her shoulder. "I thought I lost you. He hurt me, Mom, but they saved me." The mother lifted her head, her tear-streaked eyes finding Dwayne and John. For a moment, words failed her. Gratitude, disbelief, relief. All of it overwhelmed her as she stared at the two men who had stood like giants against a storm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling, then louder with the force of a mother's heart. "Thank you for saving my daughter." John gave a simple nod, his expression calm, humble. "She's safe. That's what matters." Dwayne's deep voice carried warmth as he added, "Stay close to her. Don't let her out of your sight." The mother nodded rapidly, clutching her daughter even tighter, as if she would never let go again. By now, the police had loaded the bikers into their vehicles. The engines of the patrol cars growled as the gang, once so loud and arrogant, was driven away in chains. Their reign of terror ended in humiliation. The park began to breathe again. The air, which had been thick with tension, seemed lighter. The laughter of distant children slowly returned, cautious at first, then stronger, as though life was reclaiming the space that violence had tried to poison. Dwayne and John stood together in silence for a moment, watching the mother hold her daughter. Then John glanced at his friend, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Well," he said quietly, "that was one hell of a workout." Dwayne let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, not exactly the cool-down I had in mind." The two men exchanged a look, not one of pride, but of understanding. They hadn't been there as celebrities, or as wrestlers, or as stars. They had been there simply as men who refused to walk past injustice. The mother finally lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly as she stood. She gave the two men one last look, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "You'll never know what this means to me," she said softly. "You don't owe us anything," John replied. "Just take care of her." The mother nodded, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. She turned and began to walk away, her daughter resting against her shoulder, safe again where she belonged. Dwayne and John stood still, watching them disappear into the crowd until they were gone. The park, once the stage of cruelty and violence, was now a place of peace again. Finally, Dwayne exhaled and rolled his shoulders, the weight of the fight slipping away. "Let's go," he said quietly. John tipped his cap, and together they walked down the path, their broad silhouettes fading into the sunlight. They didn't stay for applause, for recognition, or for thanks. They left knowing that they had done what needed to be done, and for the girl in the wheelchair, for her mother, and for every person who believed that monsters always win, the truth had been rewritten that day. Sometimes heroes do show up. Sometimes they change everything. Did this story surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more powerful stories. See you in the next video.